Welcome to the demonstration where we will show you how to set up VMware Data Services Manager version 1.5 in a consolidated environment. I already have the provider OVA deployed, and what you're looking for is the started appliance initialization script. That means that it's ready to begin the configuration. So we're going to create a provider account, but to do that you need to provide the password that you gave to the OVA during the OVA deployment. So once that's provided, you can go ahead and create your provider user. I'm just going to use my VMware email to set up that user. And there we go. So we're in. Now there's a whole bunch of things that you need to do in advance of creating a database, and they're all found here in the settings area. So there's a lot of S3 buckets that you need to provide. You can optionally set up SMTP, LDAP, log forwarding. As I said, all of these are optional. And in this case, we can forward logs to either Elasticsearch or anything that does syslog, like VMware's Log Insight product. You can get the provider details there, and we also have the ability to do webhooks. So we'll show you some steps on that later on. Once you have it all configured, you see this release processing task is running. And this is essentially pulling down all of the templates, the database templates from VMware that can be used to create databases later. I've also set up the SMTP, I've set up the LDAP, I've done the log forwarding to my log insight, and in fact, I've also done a webhook setting where I can send notifications to Slack related to activity in VMware Data Services Manager. So it all looks good, everything is configured. I can now go ahead and start with environments. Now I cannot create an environment which is essentially a set of vSphere resources while this release processing task is still running. So we just wait for that to complete. You can now see the provider status is ready to onboard, so we can go ahead and onboard a new environment. Now something new to version 1.5 is this consolidated environment. Essentially means the components of what was previously called the agent are also configured on the same VM where we have the provider running. So that's what we mean by consolidated. Again, we support VMware Cloud or vSphere on-premises environments. We're going to do a vSphere on-premises here, and we're going to set the vCenter server along with some credentials. All these credentials are described in our official documentation, but for ease of use, I'm just going to use the administrator user here, my SSO user. There's a second set of credentials. This is for monitoring. These are read-only credentials, just a security precaution to keep these credentials as minimal as possible. And so you can set up a second user, obviously another SSO user on your vCenter server to do the monitoring part. So with both those users in place, we do a connectivity test. That's all good. And now we can get on and select the configuration of my vSphere environment. Select the data center, select one of the clusters in that data center. Resource pools, they're optional if you want to use that. You could just use the whole cluster if you wish, and then a virtual machine folder. And now what you're doing is you're selecting storage and networks that can be consumed by the databases when we deploy those databases later on. When we're creating an environment, you can select multiple storages, you can select multiple networks, and later on I'll show you how we can select these on a more granular basis through the use of a concept called a namespace. Every environment has its own database template storage, and that's what we're setting up here. Again, it's another S3 bucket. We use S3 buckets quite considerably in the VMware Data Services Manager product. And now that everything in the environment is in place, we just save that off. The environment goes into a init state and then should come online. So now within that environment, you can see we have lots of different data stores. We have lots of different networks. We're going to fine tune the resources by creating this construct called a namespace. And the namespace is just to select some of the components that are part of the environment for use for database provisioning. Two of the things we set up in the settings were the database backup storages. One is local, one is in the cloud. And now we're getting along to selecting the data stores in each of the environments and the networks in the different environments. So you can see we don't have to select everything. We can create a namespace that just has a subset of our vSphere resources, and we can hand that subset of resources off to the database builders, whoever's creating the databases. Excellent. So we have an environment, we have a namespace within that environment. Get ahead and build a database now. We can see we have a bunch of different templates which were downloaded during the release processing, but in order to consume them, they need to be published. So we're going to go ahead and publish a couple of those now. We'll publish the MySQL and one of the Postgres SQL databases so that we can consume those when the database is being provisioned. Great. So we can attempt to create a database now, but you're going to see an error to say that there's no fully qualified domain name associated with the current organization. There is only one organization, that's the provider one that we've built so far. You could, of course, build many more, but in this case, we only have the one, and it doesn't have an FQDN suffix by default. So let's add that. DNS and fully qualified domain names play a very important role in VMware Data Services Manager, which is why we need to have this populated. So there we go. We now have our fully qualified domain name suffix. Let's go ahead and attempt to create a database again. And that looks a bit better. You can see our namespace. You can see the fact that you can select a MySQL. You can select PostgreSQL as well. There's only one version of each because they're the only ones that are published. You can give your own VM name or you can leave it at the default. I'm just changing it to simple PG. And similarly with the admin password, we auto-generate that, but you can go ahead and change that to something more meaningful to you if you so wish. Now you could create a database with a default configuration, but you could get in and tune it as well. Let's just step through it and you can see the defaults here, such as monitoring, the backup configuration, the maintenance configuration, and optionally you can create a database cluster as well. You can see the alerts from emails and webhooks. The email is added automatically, but the webhook is not, so you can add in the Slack webhook that I created earlier as well. You can tune some options. You can turn on TLS for more secure database access. And then when all of that is done, you can go ahead and create the database. And I won't keep you hanging around to see this database build, but hopefully this has given you a good idea of what's involved in setting up a consolidated VMware Data Services version 1.5. Thank you for watching.